Well, it's early morning and freezing cold in February here in Pennsylvania, outside of Lancaster, along the Susquehanna River. This morning on my walk, I was thinking of a patient I cared for many, many years ago in 1999. And she's a patient that I never really wrote a full-length article about. However, I have used her story many times when giving ethical consults in hospitals and also in other care settings where people are considering the removal of fluid, right, and nutrition from somebody, removing those tubes at certain point in their care. And the reason that I share it is because I think we often forget how close and valuable the experience of sitting knee to knee around a table is in our lives as human beings, not only in terms of family, but also in any community, whether it's work, whether it's a religious or spiritual community, whether it's a social or civic community. Sharing a meal or sharing even coffee and donuts or even just tea is somehow a way of taking into ourselves in the presence of other people something that is nutritional, right, and nourishes us. And so it becomes very, very difficult when people are talking about removing these forms of life support from somebody, not just because we're talking about the removal of tubes, right, and machinery, right, but it is tied to this deep, long, eternal thread that runs from our center all the way back through our life and all of the tables we have sat at with all of the countless people we have sat at with and shared some form of nourishment together. So let's just call this the table of nourishment. But the story focuses in on the value that the table has in our life. And the woman that I'm going to share with you today her name is Eleni. She was probably, I'd say, 6 months outside of dying when I first came to meet her. When I first came to the facility to spend some time with her, Eleni asked me if I would just sing with her. And so I sang hymns from the Greek Orthodox tradition, or read to her from the Greek Orthodox prayer book, because this was her faith. As time went on, as I asked her what more I could do, and she was living in an assisted living at the time, she asked me if I would start reading the newspaper to her. And so, every day that I was in the facility, I would stop and I would grab the newspaper that was on her table, and I would sit and read it to her, with her. I had done this for several months, and then she actually took to the bed and was no longer ambulating, was no longer getting around or getting up out of the bed. But she asked me to continue to read the paper, and so I did. And at some point in the conversation, she shared with me that she and her husband used to sit around the table in the morning every day over coffee and read the newspaper to each other. And so I began to realize not only was it nourishing to her because this was a tradition she had on a routine and daily basis in her life, it was also nourishing her, with her and for her, because she attached this event to her husband, who she lost several years ago. So not only did this tie to a thread in her heart that went all the way back through her life as long as she had read the paper around the table over coffee, it also tied it to a thread that was then woven together with the thread of her husband's heart and all the times that they shared sitting around the table together reading the paper. As time went on, she became weaker and weaker. She stopped actually eating, and in the last several weeks of her life, she asked me to do something that I was a little hesitant about, because I didn't want to do something that would cause her to miss something so much that it would push her into a place where she could not integrate her current condition. Now, keep in mind, I was 2 years into my hospice work and didn't really have a long standing tradition of taking risks with the patients that I cared for, or the residents in these facilities. So when she asked me to bring her a cup of coffee and a baklava, I stumbled. I knew she couldn't eat anything, and it took me some time to process the fact that, you know what, our nourishment comes from more than just taking the food into our mouth. That there is, when it comes to the table, there are so many things that are nourishing around the table. Whether you're sitting there by yourself, whether you're sitting there with a close loved one, whether you're sitting there with a clan or a group of people. There are other sights, other sounds, other smells and tastes that go on at the table that connect themselves because of our neural pathways to an intricate web of places and people in our past and in our current life, and also in our hopes and dreams for a future life. So I told her I would because I realized I needed to think about it and figure my way into this, right? So as the week went on, I thought, you know what? I know she can't eat, and she refuses everything because she can't take it in. I think there's something more here that she wants, right? So I stopped at the little Greek deli and picked up a cup of Elleniko, some Greek coffee, and also a baklava. And this particular baklava was made with pistachios and honey, obviously cinnamon, and it had a really wonderful aroma. And as soon as I smelled it in the small box that they placed it, I knew what my pathway ahead was, that I would just present these to her and allow her to smell them and to drink in the aroma of her past life, the life that she currently lived, but the train that trailed behind her of all the events where coffee and baklava or other pastries or other foods and other people made an important impact on her life. And so when I went in that day, I sat at her side as usual, read the articles, said a few prayers with her, and then I said, you know, Eleni, I brought what you asked me to bring. And I said, and I know that you are not taking things in. You're not asking for food. Your limitation on beverage is very, very minimal. You know, you've reduced your intake. But I all of a sudden realized the extreme value of these pieces in your life, almost sacramental, if you will. And so I just thought maybe I could allow you to smell them. Smell these two things that you've asked for, your coffee and your baklava. And if you'll allow me, maybe brush them against your lips so you can have the faintest hint of that. And she said, yes, this is exactly what I wanted. And so, almost as if the altar, I slowly took the lid off of the coffee, and I allowed the cup to come up under her nose. And with cleaned hands, I touched the rim on the inside and allowed a little bit of the coffee on her lips. And she licked it, tasted it, and she closed her eyes. And then I did the same with the baklava. Took it out of the box, held it up on that small paper that it had been nestled into, and I brought it up to her nose, and she took a deep breath. And she closed her eyes. And then when she reopened her eyes, after I washed my hands again, I touched the honey and the buttery side, and I layered a small trace of butter and honey across her lower lip. And she licked it, and she closed her eyes, and she sighed. And I could only imagine the countless memories that she had around her husband, around family, around the Greek community, around her friends, other extended family, and her own life in which she had partaken of these elements again and again and again. One of the things that I've learned about life in hospice care is we are greater than just this moment, just this purpose, just this spot in our life. We are grander than our own current personality. Our personhood goes back all the way through time to when we were born, and depending on your belief, perhaps even further than that. But we are made up of more than just this moment. And those countless moments where we've been through crises in the past, where we've been through joys and adulations in the past, all of that follows us like a train of a parade. And we are all of that. And so we often gain a sense of hope, a sense of grandeur in our connectedness to who we've been in the past. And it's also a reminder that we have been through difficult times in the past and we have survived them into this current place in our life. I left her that day after singing another hymn with her, knowing that she had somehow woven this day into all of her life with all of those people that were vital and all of the places in her own heart that she had been that gave her strength. Never forget the power of the table. The table is the place where we go to commune, whether it's with ourselves, our families, our friends, our civic or religious communities, with God himself or the divine or whatever your sense of the eternal is. The power of the table is strong.